We're the two teachers. Welcome to Citizen U.
Lifestyle. Tonight we're reviewing participation.
I love participation because the first three words of the Constitution are we the people. Our government is all about we the people. We're talking participation with our good friends Sean and Evan.
How you guys doing?
Great. What kind of questions do you have about participation, voting?
Well, I was wondering specifically on American political values. Like, can you explain what is political socialization?
Well, Sean, you're dead on. Political socialization is how do I learn about politics? Where does this come from? Now, clearly, family is a predominant influence. But of course, we're also influenced by our race, our region, our religion, gender. All of these demographic factors play a role in what I think. It's not some magic ball that I shake in my room late at night and I say, woo, look, I'm a Democrat. No, it probably has to do with your influences. Am I a religious person? Where in the country do I live? We know that if you live in New England, much more likely to be a liberal.
But political socialization is not just are you a liberal or a conservative, it's also do you participate. If your family was more likely to participate, that political efficacy gets passed on to children.
All right, sweet. I was wondering what makes public opinion polls valid? And more importantly, are they important to the political process?
Science of political science. Because to have a scientific opinion poll that's valid, first of all, you need a sample. You want to know the opinion of a universe, and you're going to take a sample of that universe.
Better be random.
The key is that it has to be a random sample, where everybody in that select universe has to have an equal opportunity to be picked and interviewed. Then you also get into question validity. Is this a fair question? Are we actually asking this in a clear, simple way to make sure that we're measuring what we want to measure?
Evan, you've touched on something that we get overwhelmed with today in our political arena, and that is public opinion polls. They're everywhere. Every time I hit a like on a Facebook, I'm participating in some sort of data collection and poll. But which ones do I believe? Which ones are valid? This is tough. I always have to look at who pays for that poll. What types of questions do they ask? And don't be moved by the push poll. The push poll doesn't even want to measure your opinion. It wants to push or manipulate your opinion. Be very leery of that phone call that comes each night at home and says, hey, would you guys vote for this guy if this was true? They're trying to push your opinions. But public opinion polls are everywhere, and it's part of our democracy.
You can actually measure the accuracy of polls with margin of error. So you know a poll is more valid if the margin of error is lower.
So now polling, again, is a form of political participation, right? So do you think you guys could expand, what are other forms of political participation?
Great. I mean, first of all, you have suffrage. You have voting rights. And certainly from the very beginning of our Constitution, we did have one elected office that was directly voted on by the people. Remember what that was?
What do you think?
The directly voted
Directly,
senators?
yes.
That would be the 17th?
17th Amendment was the direct election of senators, and before that, remember, the House of Representatives was the only office in the Constitution that we directly elected with suffrage. Yes. But there's all kinds of other ways to participate. It could be showing up to town hall meetings. It could be writing letters to the editor. These days with social media, it can be broadcasting on social media. It can be doing petitions. Well, Evan, you're a petition master.
I love petitions.
Well, Mr. Kineen, there are many ways to participate, and you've touched on some. Of course, you can litigate, you can write letters, but fellas, my favorite form of political participation, sitting around a round table and having a good political conversation. You know what we call that? Lifestyle.
That's it.
Well, you touched on voting. You actually more than touched on voting. I was wondering, what's voter turnout like in America?
Oh, Evan, you have to remind us. This is a little bit of the dirty underbelly of American democracy. We're the lighthouse of democracy. The world looks to America for leadership when it comes to democratic institutions. But despite the fact that voting is the #1 form of participation in America, we're pretty lucky if we get over 50% voting, and that's just in presidential elections. When you start looking at local elections, we had a local election here just a couple of weeks ago in town, 18% turnout. This isn't very impressive. But remember, our voting isn't always easy. voting in America sometimes is an obstacle because it's on a work day.
You can also compare voting in a general election, where you typically have higher voter turnout, versus a primary election where you have much lower voter turnout. You can compare voter turnout in a presidential election every 4 years, which is again over 50% compared to midterm voter turnout, which for just Congress, where it's usually about 35% turnout.
Now I feel like you've stepped on my toes. There are some institutional obstacles that make voting more difficult. It's not just about, well, they're lazy, they don't want to vote today. Let's not forget that unless you're a citizen, you can't vote. Let's not forget, if you're a convicted felon in many states, you'll never vote again.
You have to be registered to vote.
You got to be registered. Let's not forget that in many states, if not most states, you have to register, in some cases, 30 days before the election. Voting isn't easy. If you ask me, it should be a lot easier. I think we'd get much higher turnout if you made it a lot easier.
This has become an opinion segment. What do you know?
Well, moving on, I'm just kind of curious. So when the voters do actually turn out for the ballot, on the ballot, you know, we all hear about the Republicans and the Democrats, but what about third parties? What do they even exist in our system?
Well, they do exist, but there are obstacles to third parties, particularly the rules of the game. And the rules of our participation, in most cases, is that it's a winner-takes-all system. There's only one trophy. And when you have a contest where there's only one trophy, you typically only have two teams competing for that, because there's no trophy, there's nothing for second place, and there's certainly nothing for third place. That's called a single-member district, winner-takes-all system.
Well, Sean, you've hit a topic that's very important to participation. That is, we have two basic choices when we go vote. Two winning parties, Republicans and Democrats. Republicans more conservative, Democrats more liberal. Republicans tend to be more affluent. Democrats tend to be more working class. Republicans tend to be a little bit more educated. Democrats a little bit more youthful and younger.
We know Republicans are more likely to participate in organized religion, particularly on a weekly basis. Democrats less likely to be in organized religion on a weekly basis.
So we might have time for maybe one more question or comment.
I was wondering, because I know Law Club is so big here at Stevenson, and they talk about litigation a lot there.
Yes.
How is litigation a form of political
What a great
participation?
example. And you can actually use litigation to sue, as we saw in Brown versus the Board of Education. That was a lawsuit that certainly was able to affect participation. It was a way for the NAACP, a special interest group, to get involved in changing civil rights. Even if you don't sue, if you're a special interest group, you can file what's called an amicus curiae brief. So if you're a special interest group with a particular stance on an issue that's being litigated or sued over, you can file this brief with the court so that the court knows the opinion of your particular special interest.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Evan. You've been reviewing participation. We're the two teachers. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.